Hello, welcome back for another episode of Awaken and Ascend, or maybe you're here for the very first time. And this is the channel where I sometimes offer different insights and revelations and reflections on how we can awaken our inner visionary, our inner power, and gain more clarity in accepting the fullness of who we are and what we can contribute out into the world and have a living legacy kind of impact. And so there's lots of inspiration on this channel about that. And quite often I get to bring in special guests from around the world who've been on a journey of their own and are also sharing messages of transformation and impact and really living your purpose from your authentic center. And so welcome everyone to Awaken and Ascend. I am Jennifer Regular. Of course, I host this podcast, and I'm also the founder of the Leadership Ascension Alliance, as well as Lighting the Path, which you'll find more information about at lightingthepath.ca. So last week, because we do this podcast every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, last week I was talking about flow and shared a whole bunch of F words to focus on when we're feeling low, when we don't have our energy at its optimum, that we're looking at something that might be lacking or that we may not be giving attention to, and that we can tend to more so that we can get ourselves back into the flow, to harmonize and integrate our body, mind, and spirit, to create a higher dimensional model of living. And so one F that we definitely don't want to be focusing on is force. And that's what tends to happen when we're trying to gain some kind of control, to try to navigate a specific outcome for something that's really meaningful for us. And that's why we tend to attach to it a little bit more than other tasks that we may be given on our to-do list. And the thing about force is that it's not going to bloom until its fullest glory. You're not working at it from a place of meaningful intention where you allow it to grow in its own time and blossom fully. And I always want people to live in full bloom, to create the right conditions that support that and not try to force some particular outcome, because there may be something even better that's happening, and then there's really no room to grow. That you'll see some plants out behind me here, and there's a garden of vegetables and herbs too that I was reflecting on the other day. Like when I planted that spinach, it wasn't so it can become a carrot, right? Of course it's going to become spinach, but it's only going to become really great spinach and bloom to its fullest glory if I nurture it and give it the right conditions, the right soil conditions, the right foundation where it can grow some deep roots and really center itself and then rise up into its fullest glory. Whether or not it's seen by others, but we get to eat that deliciousness. It has to be done in its own time. Of course, we can tend to it. Of course, I'm going to water it, and the rain's going to help do that too. It needs to be out in the light. It needs that sunshine. It needs those conditions to help it thrive, right? Not struggle to survive, which so many of us do when we're trying to control different outcomes and situations. And so we don't want to force that. We don't want to force grow anything. Because it's going to feel constricted and restricted and like it's not being honored for its own process and its own rhythm. And we can learn a lot from nature in ourselves, how we tune into our own natural rhythms and what that looks like for us moving forward in our day-to-day and then in building our future and creating the right conditions that are going to support us to truly thrive. So I challenge you today to reflect on that a little bit. How have you been operating lately out in the world and with your to-do list and what you're trying to create? Are you forcing a particular outcome? Are you working like really, really hard on it and putting a lot of effort into it to make it perfect, to make it so? Or are you giving it some space to actually grow? So I challenge you this week to let go of some of that attachment, to let it go, to let it flow, and just see what comes up from that, to trust the process, to know that it is going to come about in its own time, in divine timing. And remembering too, especially if you're watching this show, you know that there's no time-space continuum, really, right? It's just allowing the space for whatever needs to rise up within you and around you, outside of you, even in your garden, in its own time. In the perfect timing, it just needs to go through a process. That's all that's happening there, and come into alignment. So the thing that you want to do control or manage is those right conditions so that it can truly thrive and not struggle to survive. So I'd love for you to reflect on that this week. Look at where you might be imposing a little bit too much control and too much force, because that comes from a place of conformity and performance and trying to meet certain standards. And of course, there's nothing wrong with having certain standards, but trust that it's going to meet those needs in a way that you may not have imagined yet. So be curious, be open to that miracle, that awe, that wonder of life. It's like, oh, making the impossible possible on its own. The magic and miracles are happening every single day. So take the time to actually notice that, feel into that, notice where you've been imposing too much control or attachment, and see if you can pull back a little bit. Give it some space to grow. Give it its own time to come into its own. And give yourself the chance to do that too. Don't be so hard on yourself, right? Be more on purpose. Less pressure, more purpose. And allow that to guide you in your steps forward. So let me know if you like this video or not, if there's any questions that's brought up for you, if it's triggered anything inside of you or activated anything inside of you to start thinking a little bit differently, to become more conscious of your actions, and to move about the world in a more inspired way. So love to see you in your comments there. And I trust that you are having a wonderful day and creating your best life. You're from the highest version of yourself, not necessarily the best, because again, that gets into the perfectionism cycle, but from your highest self, recognizing that everything you're doing is to serve a higher purpose. So let me know what you think in the comments. Share this video if it meant something and think you can share that with someone else could use that same kind of clarity or refocus or realignment. And we'll see you again next week on Awaken and Ascend. Bye for now.